All right, she's a fantastic political reporter over for the USA Today Network, covering everything Ohio, and that's Hayley BeMiller. Hayley, Mike, and Nick, thank you so much for hopping on the podcast with us.
Good to be here.
So, Hayley, we reached out to you because, and we've been telling our audience we want to do something around what happened in East Palestine, Ohio, with the train derailment, and then obviously there's been some subsequent news of other other train derailments in Ohio. I want to get the latest on that in a bit, but with respect to the derailment that happened in East Palestine, can you take our audience 30,000 foot overview as to the timeline of events and where we currently are with the community? There was a huge water crisis. Governor DeWine was there, some stuff with him drinking a bottle of water versus tap water. Can you take our audience into kind of the summary of events that happened with this train derailment?
Yeah, so it's been a little over a month now since the Norfolk Southern train derailed in East Palestine. It went off the tracks in February 3rd, right in the heart of the village. The train caught fire and spilled 5 different hazardous materials into the air, the water, the soil. The sort of most notable of these chemicals was vinyl chloride. After, I believe, a couple days, state officials, emergency responders started to get word from the company that there was sort of a volatile chemical reaction happening in the 5 cars that contained the vinyl chloride. At that point, everyone at the table came to an agreement that Norfolk Southern should go ahead and do a controlled release of that vinyl chloride, which is what, if you saw the pictures, it's what released that terrifying looking black cloud into the air. People evacuated while that was happening. They were continually testing air and water, and after the release of the vinyl chloride, the state officials told residents they could come back. The air was back to kind of where it was pre-derailment. But since all of that has happened, we've learned a little bit more about the derailment itself. The NTSB released some preliminary findings saying that there was an overheated wheel bearing that caused the train to derail, and there were some hints kind of along the route that this wheel bearing was starting to overheat. So I think that's going to be something they continue to look into. But now you still have residents just contending with the aftermath of this. A lot of people are still really concerned about the air and water. Both state and US EPA officials have said, the municipal water is safe to drink, the air is safe to breathe. Private well testing is ongoing as well, and there haven't been any problematic findings in there. But people are scared. This has been an overwhelming thing for this community, and they're just looking for answers and want some assurances that their community is going to be safe to live in the long run.
Haley, what's your assessment about, you mentioned just some of the information about what chemicals and toxins we know were released from the derailment. Has there been any other information that's come out since then as far as what other chemicals we know? If you mentioned at the time 5 things were identified, one of which is now what we know, but between what the EPA is trying to figure out, what Norfolk Southern is saying we're releasing, what's your read of where we are just from the scientific community standpoint of what information, where we are with chemicals, like what chemicals have been released?
So the main 5, I can't remember the names of all of them. I think one was like butyl acetate or something. These were the main 5 chemicals that were being carried on the train. And then beyond that, there's been some conversation about whether the EPA should be testing for dioxins, which is the stuff that can get released kind of separate from the main 5 that the trains were carrying. Last I heard on that front, I believe Norfolk Southern is going to be doing some testing for dioxins that's going to be overseen by either the Ohio EPA or the federal EPA, because that has been a concern that's come up a lot. People have been wondering why that dioxin testing won't be happening. So it's my understanding that that will be happening now too.
I actually do have to follow up on that. You just mentioned Norfolk Southern is going to be in charge of the testing, or they're working collaboratively with the environmental authority in Ohio?
The US EPA, that was part of a requirement that they issued to the company. So the company will have to test for that, but presumably, EPA officials will be looking at that sampling and sort of monitoring that it's done correctly.
Yeah, it sounds good. And actually, I want to ask you something on Norfolk Southern overall, because there was some preliminary reports about Norfolk Southern offering the community residents like some sum of money. Then they raised it a little bit more. Maybe they were covering some health expenses for the people that were experiencing issues. Where are we with respect to potential investigations that are ongoing, may happen into Norfolk Southern? Where do you expect a lot of this to play out in the legal community?
So the big investigation right now is the NTSB investigation. Separate from that, Governor Mike DeWine in Ohio has said that our attorney general is looking at the case. Still no word from our attorney general's office as to whether he's going to be taking any legal action against the company, if there's going to be any further investigation. I also know that Governor Josh Shapiro over in Pennsylvania referred this as a criminal matter to his attorney general's office. Not 100% sure the status of that. I do know as of this week, I believe Governor Shapiro met with the company, and the company agreed to provide, I think, $5 million in relief specifically for Pennsylvania residents who have been affected by that. But Governor Shapiro has been very, very outspoken, critical of the company. So I would be surprised if their attorney general doesn't take some more action at some point.
Quick break here. We are presented as always by Fresh Roasted Coffee. If you could see my screen here, Fresh Roasted Coffee since 2009. This Pennsylvania company has been delivering fresh roasted coffee. You can check out their website at freshroastedcoffee.com or shop them online through a bunch of different places. I'm going to read you something here. Nick, they roast the freshest coffee beans using the most eco-friendly roasting technology on earth. I happen to have a cup right here of fresh roasted coffee. I always record with it. Nick, why don't you tell the people, you're a coffee snob, why don't you tell the people why they should head on down to freshroastedcoffee.com and buy some of this amazing coffee?
First, Mike, let's talk about flavors. If you are a single origin kind of person like you and myself, they've got you. If you are a flavor person, they've got you as well. Flavor packs, individual items as well. And it's not just coffee, folks. You can also get tea. My wife's a tea drinker, so freshroastedcoffee.com's got her too. But more importantly, you can learn about the coffee. When you get to the website, there's a quiz that tells you what's the coffee that's best for you. Sumatra is my blend, and they got that one right. I can tell you that for sure. They'll do the same for you when you head over to the website.
freshroastedcoffee.com. Go to our episode description right now. There's a link right there, and at checkout, you're going to get a discount for this amazing tasting coffee. Head to freshroastedcoffee.com today. And now back to the show.
Between what the White House is saying about their assessment and what the state of Ohio is saying, it seems like there's sort of not conflict, but a standoff, I guess, between the governor of Ohio and the president as far as going forward with next steps. Or has that situation cooled and there's more collaboration between the two parties?
Well, I think there's been a lot of debate about the federal response and all of this. In Ohio, at least, Governor DeWine's been pretty open about the fact that, federal EPA officials were on the ground from the beginning. The NTSB investigation kicked off right away. There's still some debate, I think, as to whether Ohio would be eligible for FEMA assistance specifically. That's what happens if the governor were to declare a disaster in the area. President Biden would follow suit. That still hasn't been resolved. There have been FEMA folks on the ground kind of helping out, but Ohio hasn't gotten like the full FEMA response. So that's probably the only thing that I'm aware of that's still kind of out there. I do think there has been a fair amount of collaboration between state and federal officials. At this point, federal officials have kind of come and taken the lead on everything now. Like Ohio's EPA, I know, is deferring to US EPA on a lot of things.
That's good to hear. Hayley, I want to let you in on a little secret if you haven't been following Nick or myself or the program. A while back, Nick got into a little bit of a Twitter spat, I would say, with folks about no one's covering this story. There was somebody that works for the United Nations, I forget in what role, and Nick wrote a response that got, hundreds of thousands replies, views, and it was basically in essence that people were covering this story at the onset from the national to the local level. I want to take it to you because you've been covering the state, obviously. What do you make of people that complain that no one was covering this issue? Was the national media too late to parachute onto this, to give it the attention it deserved? What's your read on everything since you've been covering this story?
Well, I think a lot of times when people say no one has been covering this story, they're thinking about the CNN, New York Times, they're thinking about their national media, when in reality, you have local outlets, covering these from the beginning. I have colleagues up at the Akron Beacon Journal who covered kind of the immediate aftermath. The company that I work for, Gannett, also has a paper in Beaver Creek, Pennsylvania, that was covering, their side of things from the beginning as well. So, obviously when national media begins to cover an event, you're able to get more attention on it. You're able to kind of spread the message of what's happening. But so that's probably why in the beginning, people felt that it wasn't getting the attention that it deserved. Whether they stepped in at the right time, I don't know for sure. I do think some national outlets were kind of there at the beginning too. So a lot of times I think those debates are a matter of where you get your news and, what the outlets you watch are doing about a certain story.
The safety measures that Norfolk Southern has been putting forward, apparently it's a 6-point plan. From what you know about those measures and the recent derailments, because there has been at least another one since then, what's your read of whether those safety measures will fully address what the crisis currently is or what was a result of Norfolk Southern? Or is it really just sort of the beginning of just dipping its toe in the water?
Yeah, so their safety plans address one of the big things that they want to install more of these hot bearing detectors, which is what is installed along the railroad, and it detects things like the hot wheel bearing on the train that derailed. I think it'll be useful to have more of those, but at the same time, so this is like the nitty-gritty of trains that I've learned about in the past month.
We're nerds here. Let's go.
Love it. Yeah, share it.
So the train passed 3 different hot bearing detectors starting 30 miles out from East Palestine, according to the NTSB investigation. And so the first 2 bearing detectors didn't detect crisis level temperatures. It wasn't until that 3rd one where the crew on board got an alert that there was an issue and that they needed to try to stop the train. And that is what they did. They did try to stop and remedy the situation at East Palestine, but by then it appears it was too late. The thing with these detectors is that the railroads set the limits, the thresholds for what these temperatures should be, what's considered a crisis temperature. So there's been some discussion since the East Palestine derailment about whether there should be like a uniform set, a uniform temperature that's considered a crisis temperature that, should cause an alert to go off. And I don't know whether adding more detectors necessarily addresses that, if the issue perhaps is the temperature itself. And we'll see what Department of Transportation and Congress and others decide on that front. But I know the temperature threshold is one thing I'll be curious to see if any changes are made on that front.
Haley, before we let you go, Nick just alluded to it, and I alluded to it at the beginning. There's been other train derailments, excuse me, from Norfolk Southern. We heard about the one that happened in Springfield, Ohio. What's the latest on some of these other accidents that have happened? What has caused them? What is going on with Norfolk Southern that they can't drive their trains properly? Like, what has been your read with everything happening with respect to these other derailments?
Yeah, so my understanding, the one in Springfield, which is near Dayton, Ohio, there were not, it's very different scenario from what happened in East Palestine. There were not any hazardous materials on board. The train didn't catch fire or anything like it did. So it's much less severe than what happened in East Palestine. The NTSB is investigating that derailment, and it'll be a bit before we have any sense of what happened there, I think. But we had that happen, and then just this week we had there was a Norfolk Southern worker died after he was working at a railroad crossing and was hit by a dump truck, not really related to trains, but just again another really horrible story, coming related to this company. So, I'm not an expert, but it has been kind of a series of unfortunate events for them in Ohio, and they've had derailments in Ohio before. And my colleague did a story sometime after the East Palestine derailment, kind of outlining that they have, one of the worst derailment records in the country. So, the CEO, Alan Shaw, is going to be testifying before a U.S. Senate panel this week, and I think he'll have some tough questions to face during that.
Well, you can check out all of Hayley's work over on the USA Today network. She's been covering Ohio politics. She's a fantastic political reporter. Follow her on social media. Hayley, can't thank you enough for coming on the program and educating Nick and I, who are trained buffs, minors in trained buffs. Thank you so much for being on the show. Continued success to you. Please stay safe.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks for watching the Can We Please Talk podcast. Whatever clip you just watched, we hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you stick around for some more. Subscribe to the channel. My partner's over here smashing the button. Come on, do him a favor. So hit subscribe.